President Trump suffered 3 losses in court last week. In the latest ruling, a federal judge temporarily blocked the president from using military money to build his border wall.
Meanwhile, 2 judges ruled lawmakers should have access to the president's financial records, including from Capital One and Deutsche Bank, where his transactions were flagged by internal units dedicated to preventing money laundering.
So joining us now is CBS News legal contributor and former assistant to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York, Keir Dougall. Thank you so much for joining us. Let us start with the latest ruling about the border wall in Oakland.
Right. So there are several rulings, and the graphic here says that losing streak, but really what I think we're watching is the winning by the Constitution, by the separation of powers. We're seeing checks and balances operating the way our founding fathers wanted them to, and you know, those guys were kind of smart. So the border wall issue is a particular loss for that particular initiative, but what it does is it supports the Constitution's placement of the spending power inside of Congress, and so by requiring affirmative authority from a congressional action before money can be spent, it prevents any president, whoever he or she may be, from spending on whatever he or she would want to. It was an effort by the founders to prevent a monarchical, excessively powerful president. So the particular details of this ruling are important because the court found that the president's plan was unlikely to pass muster, was unlikely to be based upon a lawful grant of authority by the Congress, and in particular, it foundered on under this particular statute that the circumstances weren't unforeseen. And that has broader implications for the national emergency that we've talked about previously on the air here, and questioning whether or not it exists. So the judge said it was very unlikely for the administration to show that this need to move money from military personnel over to a border wall amounted to unforeseen circumstances, which was the language under that particular statute. But of course, that has implications for whether or not there really was a national emergency. Right. The judge also found that the purpose of a border wall, of spending on a border wall, was too far away from the military appropriation that was being used to move the money around. It was too far away from military construction. So there were several difficult parts of this ruling for the administration, but overall, it's a victory for the separation of powers and for checks and balances.
So let's talk about some of the other things that the president has seemingly been on the losing end of, some decisions. Let's talk about the financial records and the fact that the president has tried to keep those hidden from Congress. How did it go over in court?
Those arguments also did not do well, and the 2 particular court decisions related to a subpoena to Trump's accounting firm and also to some banks. But also in this mix is Treasury Secretary Mnuchin's refusal to hand over President Trump's tax returns, and it's all on the same theory, that there's no legitimate legislative purpose for those requests, for the accountant's records, for the banks, or for the tax returns. And the 2 court decisions that we have now say no. First of all, the Congress does not need to be in an impeachment inquiry in order to conduct oversight. That's not required. And secondly, the Congress's interest in, for instance, making sure that we know whose interest the president is acting in, making sure that we have good disclosure. The Constitution has an emoluments clause, which is fancy language for preventing pay-to-play and preventing corruption. And the framers were very concerned with having our administration, particularly the president, be in the thrall for financial reasons and making decisions that weren't based on the best interests and solely the interests of the country. So what the 2 courts noted was that Congress has a legitimate investigative reason and legislative purpose to find out whether or not there are financial interests that are perhaps influencing the president. Remember, this president is the first president in the modern era to refuse to disclose his tax returns. 40 years worth of presidents have done so. This is also the first president not to take the very aggressive steps to remove himself and distance himself from any business operations that he might be involved in.
And just want to point out one more, some might call it a loss, but here New York State passed a law that would permit them to hand over state taxes to certain congressional committees. And I presume the way that some of these rulings have gone, if this state law is to be challenged, it seems like it's probably going to go in the favor of the New York State lawmakers versus the president. Well,
as I understand it, that once that law is signed by Governor Cuomo, it does have a requirement that there be a stated legitimate and legislative purpose. So again, you know, it is fair to say that you don't want Congress going on a fishing expedition. But what these courts have found is that Congress has a clear and valid legislative purpose for anti-corruption reasons, for disclosure reasons, simply to inform the public. And the other important part of this, that part of the decision from Judge Mehta, was noting that it doesn't matter whether or not Congress has potentially mixed motives here. Of course, this is politics, and this is a Democratic House committee seeking this information, and so there are going to be political motivations. What the judge found, and I thought this was important, is that that doesn't matter as long as there is also a legitimate legislative reason for doing this, then the subpoena will be upheld.
All right, so when the president says presidential harassment, hey, it may be true, but that might not make a difference.
Correct. As long as, and these judges have found, both Judge Mehta and Judge Ramos, I worked with Judge Ramos when I was a federal prosecutor. We were federal prosecutors together. I know him to be a very thoughtful and careful lawyer. These judges have found that as long as there is a valid legislative purpose, these subpoenas are going to be upheld.
When I say it may be true, I mean some may think it's true, some may disagree. Fair.
Thank you very much, Keir.
Thank you.